Hi, and welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of the Ace Tennis Podcast. I am Avyukt, and this is the Doon School's first ever tennis podcast. It will be completely run by the Doon School's tennis community, closely following the ATP and the WTA tour, bringing you highlights and analysis from matches and tournaments, and much more from the entirety of the tennis world. In this episode, we shall analyze the recently concluded 2021's edition of the French Open, the second Grand Slam of the year, and I will be accompanied in doing so by the senior members of the Doon School's tennis team, Aradhya and Archit.
So, guys, let's start by discussing the how great it was to have the fans back in the stadiums. Aradhya, what are your views on this?
I think it's great to have the fans back. The fans create a great atmosphere for the players as well. And I also believe the impact of the absolutely magnificent finals we witnessed was amplified by the fans. And after all, no one wants to play in an empty stadium. So it's always a pleasure to have fans back.
Definitely, guys. I think it's great to have the crowd back in the stands, especially in such intense matches. I do feel that they have a great impact on the players. There's pressure for some, motivation from the others. But overall, I think they create a great atmosphere. And definitely agree with Radha that this was a long-awaited tournament where Nadal was looking to break the tie with Federer of 20 majors and go for his 14th Roland Garros title. So to have the fans back in these matches was just amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you guys to the extent of having fans back, and of course, congratulations to the organizers for that. However, I do feel that in terms of PR stunts and everything, the organizers had quite a bad tournament in that front because of what happened, of course, with Naomi Osaka
Hmm.
and the night sessions, which turned out to be, in my eyes, a complete disaster because it really brought down the effect of having fans back.
I think the night sessions were an absolute chaos. This is something I think the organizers have to look into next year. Crowds had to leave the matches in between, and there was heavy criticism from the public. So I think this will be amended next year.
Same guys, not a big fan of the night sessions myself. The conditions are heavier at night. And I believe there were 10 matches the entire French Open, and this is happening for the first time, especially with COVID restrictions. And as Aradhya pointed out, the crowd leaving in between, there's momentum shift for players. The disruption is just very frustrating for the players also. So I think, but clay is all about adapting. So that's what the players really had to focus on. So, guys, now talking about the early stages of the tournament. Well, with those come the early round exits. And talking about early round exits, Dominic Thiem really stood out for me. He lost to Pablo Andújar in a 5-set match, and Thiem is a very strong clay court player. So to see him 2 sets up in a first round match and then lose was a really big shock for everyone. He definitely hasn't been at the top of his game this year, and he even recently pulled out of the Tokyo Olympics to focus on the championships at Wimbledon and defend his title at the US Open.
Yeah, I think the team disappointment was a big one for me as well. To me, he's at least a decent tennis player on clay, if not a good player, because I remember he beat Djokovic in 2018 as well. So I think the team disappointment was a big one for everyone, especially being 2 sets up. But there were a lot of upcoming players in this French Open as well. And Avyukt, I think you will be a better able to tell everyone about that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we had the likes of the Italian duo of Yannick Sinner and Musetti, who really stood out for me in terms of the really next generation, the teenagers. Musetti, of course, was making his main draw Grand Slam debut, and I think he, in specific, caught the eye of most people as he had a deep run. He reached the fourth round, and he was on the verge of upsetting the eventual champion Djokovic, having been 2 sets up. But then the mentality monster he is, Djokovic, came through. Of course, we know about that. But yeah, there were other players like Francis Tiafoe who exited in the early stages, and then of course Karen Khachanov was ousted by Nishikori, who was making his return after retiring last year from tennis. This was one of his few early tournaments back from retirement, and of course that was a shock. I was expecting him to make a deeper run, but yeah, in terms of rising players, that was the scenario. So, guys, another major talking point from the French Open was Roger Federer's withdrawal after the third round. And in my opinion, this, I mean, to completely agree with what the legendary Patrick McEnroe said, that he understands Federer's decision, but he's not a big fan of it because he's treated the French Open as a tune-up tournament and not like a Grand Slam. I, being a Federer fan, I personally like the fact that this will probably elongate his career. And from that perspective, from that side, I completely understand his decision. But I mean, you've got to think, it's at the end of the day, it's the Roland Garros. It's one of the four most prestigious tournaments in the sports history. You cannot treat it like a tune-up tournament.
Yeah, I think there are two folds to this debate. I think there are people on Federer's side who think he wanted to keep himself fit for Wimbledon, which is why he took the decision to withdraw. And then there were people who thought that he would end up losing to Djokovic, and that's why he withdrew. So for someone like Federer, who's achieved more than one can possibly imagine, I think it's implausible to say that he would just withdraw for avoiding a loss. And even as a Djokovic fan, it just seems implausible for me to actually believe that. But I think the problem with this decision was he knew that he might not be able to continue, and he treated French Open as a tune-up tournament, which I don't think is the best way forward, because for some it doesn't really suit someone like Federer. Because I think, as Avyukt mentioned, there could be a possible there could be possibly another entry for someone, and I think that was denied. So that would be another talking point in the future as well.
Well, as you guys already stated, I do feel it's all about perspective. And as a Federer fan, I mean, who isn't? I do support his decision because he's already set on his objective of performing great at the Wimbledon. And considering the situation with his knees, that third round match against Dominic Crawford, which went late night, definitely took a toll on his knees because the conditions are heavier at night, the ball bounces lower. So there was more pressure on his knees, and he's already been through 2 knee surgeries. Just like Aradhya mentioned, I think Federer might have blocked out the opportunity for an upcoming player or a potential qualifier. And I think it's all about perspective, so to say.
Yeah, I agree with you guys there. He definitely blocked the spot in the main draw for probably another qualifier who could have been another upcoming player, another next gen player. And I completely feel that this is he should have thought about this. I mean, even in the build up to the tournament, he wasn't great. He lost to Pablo Andujar, and which was kind of a shock for everyone. But come on, we could cut him some slack because he was coming from 2 knee surgeries. And but if you're not sure that you're gonna play the entire tournament, then why enter it? It's a major, and you're blocking the spot for someone else. Uh, Tennis at this stage, with the big three nearing the end of their careers and the tail end of their careers, and of course earlier Andy Murray, who was considered to be a part of this group, and we had the big four, has already really gone down the rankings and is no longer a big threat. But yeah, these guys are nearing the end of their careers, and we really, as a sport, need to look forward to the next generation. But if these guys play like this and withdraw from tournaments just because of greater objectives, it's not right in my eyes. You have to look at the greater good for the sport. From Federer's perspective, wise decision, big up to him. But from the wider sports perspective, I think it's really sad to see a senior player do this.
But talking about the end of their careers, do you really think they're nearing the end? Because we see Djokovic, we see Nadal, they're still in the top 3. Federer's world
Yeah,
number 8 right now,
that's
and they're dominating nearly every tournament. So
that
what do you feel about that?
yeah, that's good. But I mean, Federer's 39,
Hmm.
Nadal's 35, Djokovic's about to turn 35 or is probably 35. So these guys are humans after all. They don't have that much left in their tank. And the young guns are knocking on the door. We saw Dominic Thiem win the US Open last year. You can argue that maybe he didn't have a tough match, or this or that, but hey, it's a major, and he won a major, and he's shown to the rest of the generation. And mind you, who have been knocking, we saw Tsitsipas take Djokovic to 5 sets, but in the French Open final, Thiem himself was very close to winning the Australian Open. So they are knocking on the door, and I wonder how much the big three have got left in their tank. And come on, if it's not now, even if it's another 5 years, this doesn't set a great example for the upcoming players. It shows that you can specialize in one tournament, and maybe tennis is an all-round sport. The thing I enjoy and love about tennis more than other sports is that we have 3 different surfaces. Now, of course, grass court has only one major tournament, and hard court has 9, and clay has 4. But that doesn't mean you disrespect any surface. At the end of the day, it's tennis, and these are different surfaces. You, as a player on the circuit and as a senior player, you have to respect all of them.
Well, I think this has also shown how important your mental strength is. Like you said, these guys reaching the physical limits, they're 35, 34, 40 years old. They've simply shown how important your mental strength is during a match. How many times have we seen Djokovic come back, from 2 sets down? We saw it in the Grand Slam final this year. We saw it in the semifinals as well when he was 1 set down against Nadal. So that's really an important fact in this game as well.
But I think this decision to withdraw also stems out of toxic rivalry as well, because we know these greats, the big three, are poised at 2019 now. I mean, honestly, in 10 years down the line, we would look at someone who has won the greatest Grand Slams, irrespective of the court they're playing at. But I think this decision of Federer withdrawing will really reflect bad on the tennis community and on the juniors coming in, because Federer is generally known as someone with a lot of class, with a lot of respect, and with a great demeanor on the court as well. So I think this will be a great talking point and a point as well in next
But,
5 years.
but I think we're criticizing this that Federer might have used this as a tune-up for Wimbledon. What else do you think he could have done, to sort of build up his game, to be back fully prepared for Wimbledon? What
Well,
other way
I
was
don't
there?
think you play a tournament just to tune up for another tournament. You're treating the Roland Garros like a practice court match. If you want to do that, there are a lot of practice tournaments that you could probably play.
But I don't think that was the case, right? Because we saw against Kopfer, there were such close sets, he was putting it all in. And again, I don't think there's any other way for him to build back. Because before Wimbledon, there's only one tournament for him to play. And I don't think that's enough for him to be ready for Wimbledon, considering that he's been gone for more than 1.5 years now.
I think we had the pleasure of witnessing two great semifinals as well. The first one being where Zverev played Tsitsipas, but Tsitsipas was too good in the fifth set, and he kept his nerve at the crucial points. There was a specific, he was love 40 down in the fifth set, and Zverev had 3 break points. So I think Tsitsipas played really well, and there was this really emotional speech which he had about him coming from a very small place like Greece and making it to the French Open final. And what do you think about that, Avyukt?
Yeah, I think his story's been great, but just to talk in terms of in technical terms of the semi-final of Zverev and Tsitsipas, I think Tsitsipas really seems to be the kryptonite to Zverev, having beaten him five times prior to this meeting, with Zverev getting the better of him on only 2 occasions, and of course he made it six after this meeting, and this certainly looks like a rivalry we'll cherish in the years to come. I remember that in the next gen after Thiem, I think Zverev was the really first person to make his mark on the tour, and I really expected big things of him. Being tall, 6 foot 6 inches, athletic, having a very good sweet spot, and really catching the eye when he was a teenager. But Tsitsipas has come in and really been his kryptonite. 75% of the wins. And of course, this was Clay being 2 inches taller, where I've always was going to struggle with the bounce and everything. So yeah, I think this rivalry will be really interesting to look at in the future, and I really look forward to it.
And both Stefanos Tsitsipas and Alexander Zverev really stand out for me when we talk about the upcoming grades of the sport. We saw Zverev in the last year's US Open final, and he was moments away from winning it. And then we saw Stefanos find his way into this French Open's finals after winning a 5-set thriller against Zverev. So both of them have really shown that they are very strong contenders for majors.
Yeah, I think, and what's really great about them is that they're not really just one court specialists, which certainly seemed Thiem's case. However, he's had a major drop in Clay this season, but that's another story. But yeah, these guys seem to be performing on all surfaces. Of course, grass has been a bit underwhelming, but we can cut them some slack. They're youngsters after all, and I think they'll eventually come good on grass as well.
And with the COVID situation, I think all these players have gone to a lot of mental stress as well, with bio bubble fatigue, playing without crowds, which isn't the usual setting for them. So I think these all these players have really shown that with the most extreme of situations, they can really buck up their game and they can do the things that they were doing before the situation as well.
Yeah, I think after we'd witnessed a great 5-set match, we didn't know what was upcoming for us. The Djokovic Nadal match was an absolute thriller, and we had our eyes glued for all the sets. I mean, I don't think anyone could miss even a point of their match. There were players like Roddick, Murray, and Federer tweeting during the third set about the quality of the game. And the third set, I believe, was some high quality tennis. And for me, this is the best clay court match I've ever seen.
Definitely, Aradhya. I think both these semi-finals were really breathtaking matches. And we saw how Nadal really came off with a strong start by taking off that opening set. And that's what we're always expecting from him on clay, especially at Roland Garros, no matter who the opponent is. But once again, no one really proved with that fabulous comeback how mentally strong he is. And no matter what the surface, he can be the best player on it. So that's really commendable. And anyways, it's very tough to compare these guys. I think they've accomplished so much in their careers, and it's simply unmatched what they have done. And that's really inspiring for the other younger players, namely, just like we've been talking about Tsitsipas, Zverev, Dominic Thiem. I think they've set a really high standard for these players as well.
Where do we start about this 58th edition of these of a battle between these two gladiators?
Yeah.
Absolute legends of the game, one of the best the sport has ever seen. And yeah, 58th edition, Nadal, Djokovic coming out on top, although I really didn't expect that, pulling off a remarkable comeback. Yeah, Djokovic played a phenomenal match, and I think really what the catalyst in the entire match was Djokovic winning, coming out on top in that second set that will be remembered in years to come. It's one of the most memorable sets I've ever seen. Crazy atmosphere in the stadium. Fans, of course, made it better. And yeah, it lasted more than 1.5 hours alone. That set, which is more than football matches. It was insane. But again, just to tackle the analytical side of the match, where Djokovic eclipsed Nadal, and what really has been Nadal's strength throughout his career on clay has been that he dominates the mid shot exchanges. The average rally length for the match was 5.3 shots, and the rallies between 4 to 7 shots. Usually, this is when Nadal is dominant. But hey, look at this: Djokovic won 54 points, 54 of these points, with Nadal winning only 40. Djokovic really made his mark over here. I think where Nadal struggled to, uh, come out on top, where Nadal could have done better, is going for Djokovic's second serve, which in my opinion was a bit underwhelming throughout the tournament. In the first two sets of the final, of course, we saw Tsitsipas really going for it, but yeah, that is another story. So I think that's when Nadal could have really hit and damaged Djokovic. But yeah, Djokovic
And
phenomenal.
and Avyukt, I think again the factor of mental strength comes in here because all these players are really good at the game. Who doesn't have a good forehand, who doesn't have a good serve, but are they really able to perform at the crucial point? Are they patient enough before they get aggressive in that point? It's a 20 shot rally, 25 shot rally. Do you just go for it and you miss it? So I think these are all very determining factors in such intense matches. And I think Djokovic has really dominated this factor, and I think there's no one better than him in the sport for this.
I think after all these matches, the probably the factor that led Djokovic to this win is the fact that one, Nadal didn't attack his second serve, and two, Djokovic cut down the average hits in a match. So I think that was one factor that led Djokovic to win, because I personally didn't expect that, even though I hard Djokovic fan. I think Djokovic cut down on the average average shots in a rally, which actually led him to win this. And we all know that Djokovic has a pretty weak second serve, and I think Nadal could have dominated on that, especially because Nadal has a solid backhand on a solid forehand on clay.
And again, as this match I think led into the night, I heard Nadal state after the press conference that as the match progressed, the ball started coming more below his shoulders, and he's not used to that because he prefers playing the ball at a height, and he really produces a lot of topspin on that. But I think Novak really adapted beautifully to the situation, and that's why he came out on the top.
Yeah, I think, and that was the case in the finals as well. Of course, Nadal versus Djokovic was the best match of the tournament by far in terms of quality, but that shouldn't overshadow the finals, which, in my opinion, was a very fascinating battle.
Definitely.
We have, of course, Tsitsipas hitting the single-handed backhand, which was blistering, absolutely blistering in the first two sets. But that's the thing about Grand Slams, isn't it? 2 sets isn't enough. It's not a normal ATP tournament. You have to win 3 sets, and that I think was the difference. Djokovic, of course, being stronger over 5 sets, and that is what really matters at the end of the day.
And talking about that backhand, I mean, if you remember, he was match point down and he hit a down the line backhand, right in the bottom right corner of Djokovic's court. So if he's able to produce that with so much pressure, I think again that these are the factors that really decide what are the turning points of a match. Are you really able to win a major or you're not? So I think Tsitsipas definitely will be holding a Grand Slam major one day, and that's the same for a lot of these players. Namely Zverev, Thiem. These guys have really shown that they are very strong contenders. So I mean, that was a great final.
But Aradhya, I just wanted to get your thoughts on where Tsitsipas lost the match. I mean, I remember watching the match, and when Tsitsipas went 2 sets to love up, I was completely sure that no way Djokovic was going to turn that around, because Djokovic had been playing high level tennis for 3 weeks. Let's not forget that he opted to play an ATP 250 right before the French Open, which raised quite a few eyebrows, because that meant one playing just the week before the major started.
So I think for me, this was more of a Gen Z battle versus the Big Three battle, because I think the way Tsitsipas was playing throughout the tournament and on the day of the final, he had absolute breathtaking ground strokes. I mean, the way he was hitting the ball, I could see nowhere where Djokovic could win. But I think where this is where experience comes into play. I think Djokovic dominated him mentally, even though Tsitsipas was not under a tremendous amount of pressure till the fifth set. There were always times where Djokovic would have the crucial points. So I think that is where Djokovic slipped through and he won the game.
But I also feel that Tsitsipas might have gassed himself out after the second set, because he was really putting a lot of his energy in the first 2 sets. And I mean, why wouldn't he? But conserving your energy is also a very important factor, because the match can go the distance anytime. You might be 2 sets up, match point up, but the match can go downhill from that. So I think tennis is all about comebacks, ups and downs, and we've seen that plenty of times. And I think that's what happened there. As Aradhya pointed out, he really mentally dominated Tsitsipas, and I think the nerves got to him. So I think that was definitely the turning point for.
To highlight the fact that Djokovic opted to play that ATP 250 before Roland Garros, right the week before Roland Garros. I think fatigue did come into play in his match versus both Nadal and Tsitsipas, which is the reason, like Aradhya earlier mentioned, him trying to bring down the average length of the rally. In the finals as well, first 2 sets, I think the average length of a rally was high, which meant that Tsitsipas, who in my opinion was in a superior physical condition, was dominating, and that's why he went up. But then after that, Djokovic really, in my opinion, started mixing it up. He hit the drop shot more often. He lobbed the ball more often. He took spin off. He added spin. He really variated his game, which I think he's really picked up from Federer. We talk about them improving by looking at each other. I think Federer's game really involves mixing up the shots, and Djokovic really did that, which helped him reduce the break Tsitsipas's flow, whom in my opinion is a really player who thrives on having flows in a match, and he disrupted that, and that resulted in a lower rally length, which meant that the 0 to 4 shots length rallies were 167, which were a staggering 53.7% of the entire points. And there's no way Djokovic was letting Tsitsipas coming on top in that battle. And of course, that in my eyes was the difference.
And I definitely admire that about Djokovic. I mean, who doesn't? Because as I said, clay is all about adapting. We saw that last year at the French Open. It was held at a different time. The conditions were much different. It was very cold. And we saw the increased number of drop shots from Djokovic then also. And as you talked about the fatigue factor, so yeah, I think adapting to his opponent, the surface, the conditions, that's really something that he does brilliantly. And that's why we've seen him dominating so much.
But I think there's a lot from to take from Djokovic. I think the next gen can learn a lot from Djokovic, because at the time that Djokovic came in, Federer was at the peak of his career, Nadal was building up, and Djokovic was not a crowd favorite. He was booed by crowds, and I remember the specific US Open final where Djokovic did end up beating Federer, but there was a lot of criticism for his aggressive attitude. So I think at a time where the big three have dominated for the past 2 decades, it's time for the new generation to learn from actually Djokovic, how Djokovic went through, and I think how actually he joined the big two, because Federer and Nadal had dominated till about the 2010s. So I think that is something that the new generation can take away from this.
Definitely, when he was the underdog when he came in, I remember, and I think that's something that he's shown us over the years what he can do. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from all the three of them, Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. And I would like to include Andy Murray in that list as well. I mean, even he's accomplished a lot of things in his career. So all these senior players, as you mentioned, experience did come into the finals. So it's all about learning and growing in the sport.
A few things to take away from the finals, specifically the washroom break Djokovic took right when he went two sets to love down. That was a phenomenal strategy from Djokovic. Just going, clearing his mind out, taking some air, and getting right back into it. And he was a different player after that. After that washroom break, Tsitsipas said it himself that he really Djokovic came back from the washroom break as a different player.
Yeah, these are all the small things that matter. It's one point. It could be a break point, it could be a washroom, it could be anything. The small things really build up to the outcome of the match and how it ends up to be. So that's something that, it's really, I think, difficult in the sport as well to maintain your focus for such long hours, to really put out everything on the court. And these three have really done it well in their brilliant careers. So. Well, that marks the end of the first episode of the ACE podcast. Stay tuned in and hope to see you very soon.